All City Media here once again at our Winter Meetings headquarters here in San Diego, California. My name is Jesse Friedman, along with Patrick Lyons from DNVR, Ryan Herrera from CHGO. We're here to talk about the Colorado Rockies here in this segment. Patrick, of course, you're the resident Rockies expert. I'm told that Ryan McMahon and Brendan Rodgers might possibly be a little bit redundant. Like maybe one of those guys could be expendable for the Colorado Rockies this offseason. Tell us a little bit more about what's going on in Colorado.
Wow, that's interesting. You've been hitting some good sources here, Jesse.
Yeah. I've been talking to someone who really knows his stuff. I don't know who it was.
Talking to some folks. Well, at the deadline to add players to the 40-man roster to block them from being selected in the Rule 5 draft, the Rockies made a super interesting trade with the Cleveland Guardians that, at the time a couple weeks ago was discussed, but almost flew under the radar, deserved a little bit more time. And right now is a great time to talk about the acquisition of Nolan Jones, a left-handed hitting outfielder, something that the Rockies have needed for a little while.
I know a team with some left-handed hitting outfilders.
Don't get me started here, Jesse. Trade with the Diamondbacks, Eligibility Montero, Jake McCarthy. We'll throw in some prospects.
I know a team that could use a left-handed hitting.
Oh, there's so many potential trades.
Oh,
right
man.
here.
All right. We'll still have to see what your offer is later. You slide it across the table. But Nolan Jones, left-handed hitting outfielder, he came up as a third baseman in a Cleveland organization that had, I don't know if you've heard of him, Jose Ramirez, J-Ram.
Yeah, they have a pretty good third baseman over there. Yes.
So you're not playing third base, kid, right?
Yeah.
Not this time.
No, definitely not. It's like being a third baseman in the Rockies organization when Nolan Arenado was there. We're not going to talk about that. But with Nolan Jones, again, classically trained third baseman. Well, Ryan McMahon's already there, but you know what? Maybe we'll see. Bill Schmidt may have something up his sleeve because if Nolan Jones and maybe even Eligibility Montero have a left-handed, right-handed platoon over at third base, that doesn't leave any room for Ryan McMahon, except when you think the fact that he can play second base very well. Probably got robbed of potential Gold Glove finalist.
Yeah.
Gold Glove award a couple years ago. He can play second base, but Brendan Rodgers is there. And that kind of puts those two guys into a battle and say, well, you know what? You've got a lot of infielders right now. You don't have a ton of outfielders that you might be in love with. That could make one of those guys expendable.
Yeah. I mean, when you have, this is a question that I will pose, and just to get back to it, but is that a good problem? This is something I always think of.
Yeah.
Like, is that a good problem to you to have that kind of just roster, not even imbalance, but just like too many players that could play the same amount of positions? Like, how do you feel about that? That's number one. But then number two, like, where do you go from there? If you're the Rockies, if you're in charge of the Rockies, you're trying to figure out what to do. Where do you go from there?
Yeah, we were talking about the Diamondbacks and how they've got 4 outfielders. Good problems, like having too much starting pitching.
They don't just have 4 outfielders; they have 4 center fielders. That's what makes it so
bragging.
insanely.
Quit bragging. I don't want to talk about them anymore. There's a whole extra video for that. Go search that on PHNX Sports. But yeah, you've got a lot of those, so that allows you to make some moves. I think in the D-backs case, they could almost sit on their guys for a year to see really who breaks out amongst those 4 guys.
Yeah.
And then you have your answer. Then that probably means whoever number 4 is on the depth chart, now you're going to get a little bit less for them. The Rockies, because they're the Rockies, I could see them maybe doing the same thing and sitting and waiting. McMahon still has several more years left, has an extension. Rodgers only has 3 more years. That's what's crazy, is it feels like he just finally came on the scene.
Yeah.
2021 was his first full year. Still wasn't even totally healthy. But then 2022, the pieces finally came together after an April in which he hit under 100 and a September where he wasn't very good either. But you look and go, hey, all right, this is the big leaguer that you selected 3rd overall in the 2015 MLB draft. And now there's only 3 years left before he ends up reaching free agency. And if you already know that you might not be extending him, maybe you put him on the trade market so that you kind of clear up some space at third base, move McMahon over to second, and now you can improve either that rotation, the bullpen, or the outfield for someone who wants a second baseman who just won the Gold Glove Award in a year in which the shift is banned and left-handed hitters are going to be putting base hits through the right side with ease. Not if you've got a Gold Glove second baseman like Brendan Rodgers.
I have to say, like, from an outsider's perspective, I'm curious what your perspective is on this. It seems like at times, at least I personally have felt that Brendan Rodgers and Ryan McMahon, that both of them could be like incredible baseball players. Like there was a time And maybe I was misguided in thinking this, but it was kind of like, okay, this Ryan McMahon kid might be like, I don't want to say Nolan Arenado part 2, but like, I mean, he's really good defensively, as you talked about earlier. And at times it's looked like the bat was really for real. Looking at the numbers, though, it just doesn't quite line up. He's never really put it together over the course of a full season. And then on the flip side, I remember back in 2015, and Diamondbacks fans remember that draft. That's when they took Dansby Swanson first overall and then promptly traded him away. I remember.
He doesn't want to talk about that, does he?
Yeah, no Diamondbacks fan wants to talk about that. But I remember in that draft, like Brendan Rodgers was said, at least if my memory is serving me correctly, that Brendan Rodgers had like the highest ceiling. It was Dansby Swanson and then Alex Bregman, right? Mm-hmm. And then Brendan Rodgers. And it was like, okay, you know, maybe Bregman and Swanson are like more sure things. Maybe the floor is a little bit higher, but Brendan Rodgers could be just like this crazy, you know, like superstar level player. And it seems like that's another thing that seems like it could have happened, but it hasn't really amounted to that so far for the Rockies.
Yeah, no, that's absolutely true about his ceiling. I almost a comp I want to use is a guy like Xander Bogaerts, who I know the Cubs are really interested in right now, where you say, you know, 25 to 30 home run power, still being able to play shortstop, drive in 100 runs. Well, they had to move him off a shortstop over to second base. The power isn't there exactly, so he hasn't really reached those heights. And then McMahon seemed like he was very much doing that, especially 2018, where we really got to see him a lot more. He was a part of that postseason run. 2019 still. But then maybe it's kind of hit a bit of a ceiling, you know, still young enough to take it up another notch, but we haven't seen that yet. But I think to your point, Rodgers is the guy that you could still say he's young enough to continue to have that one more level, because we only just saw his first full healthy season. A lot of qualifiers there.
Yeah.
But it was his first full healthy season. He might have more left in the tank, but he only has 3 more years left to possibly do that. So he could be expendable if Nolan Jones is that solution at third base for the Rockies.
How old is Rodgers?
So I think he just finished up his age 25 season.
Okay. Wow.
So he's going to be age 26 season.
So he's still very young.
Ryan McMahon's only going into his age 28 season. So
10 days from today, actually, he'll be 28.
Yeah. So, I mean, they're not that far apart in age either, too, which seems to be strange for those guys. Mm-hmm. But McMahon has been doing it a lot longer. But I think you could still make the case that, you know, Brendan Rodgers has that higher ceiling, and they're both really great defensively too.
Mm-hmm. And that when I look at it again, also from an outsider's perspective, and just looking at maybe even how the Cubs work out, it's like it's tough to like try to balance that, who has the higher ceiling versus who has the higher floor. Like sometimes you want the higher floor guy because you know what you're going to get. You know you're going to get good production. He may blow up every year, every other year, whatever. But you know where he's going to be. But then you have a guy like you're talking about, Brendan Rodgers, who could blow up next year out of nowhere, but it's possible. Or he could have another, you know, subpar season, and there's like not a whole lot of ability to predict the in between there. Like, can he reach that ceiling, or will he hit that floor? And that's always one of those things where if you're in, you know, a little bit of a roster crunch, how do you balance that? How do you choose what's the better of those two things? And it's always tough for me.
Well, I think that's it, is that Rodgers might have the higher ceiling and McMahon is a little more consistent. He struggled in 2022. It wasn't until, you know, the trade deadline wasn't until August 1st. Not that he was getting traded, but it wasn't until then that, you know, the contract and the extension he had just signed, you know what, you're not going to put up the numbers you wanted to put up when you signed that. So put that behind you. And it was like a whole new season for the final 2 months. But still, that floor I think is a little bit better than Rodgers, who we saw in April. 084, I want to say was that number. It was just that bad, and it was does he need to go back to AAA, and then immediately turns around on May 1st and, you know, has a big day, feels good going forward. So he's the guy with that higher ceiling, and so it's hard to know who you should possibly trade first. Rodgers is going to be still a little bit more affordable because he's just going to be going through arbitration. So but McMahon, you've committed to long-term. Like he said, he wants to stay here and not go into free agency. He would have been a free agent after the 2023 season. So you don't want to go back on that and say, hey, we just gave an extension to a guy, and now we traded him.
Yeah. The optics of that is a little weird.
Some teams do that, and it's just, that's baseball, and people don't really think too much of it. Mm-hmm. But the Rockies are a team that, you know, people, you know, take umbrage. They have some issues with playing in Colorado, especially if you're a pitcher. And so I think the Rockies have to be a little bit more careful with their guys. And how they, you know, maybe trade players or extend players and how it might look. So they might not have that same luxury to extend a guy and immediately trade them, unless your name is Nolan Arenado, of course. That's
And then we also give $50 million to the team to take.
yeah.
him.
So what are you doing here, Patrick? Give us your final. What's the final takeaway here? You trading? Are you definitely making a trade? And who would you deal?
I think really Ellie Harris Montero is a guy that's part of the conversation. If Nolan Jones is in third base now you have to trade either McMahon or Rodgers, and they still might not know yet about Jones's defense, so you can put that off. But there's still not room for Ellie Harris Montero, so I think you got to make a trade here this offseason. The longer you wait, the longer people might not be as interested in, and holes are filled. The D-backs go out and sound like an Evan Longoria. Now they no longer need third base filled, and they're less likely to take a guy like Ellie Harris Montero. So you got to make a move as soon as possible. Rodgers, only 3 years left of club control. I think that move might make more sense for the Colorado Rockies.
All right. Well, thank you all for tuning in here. We'll be here all week, just talking Diamondbacks, talking Rockies, talking Cubs here at the winter meetings. Thank you so much for joining us.